Suzanne McCardle, and I'm coming up on my 13-year anniversary of being at the Census Bureau. All of my time has been spent in our Geography Division's Cartographic Products and Services branch. A few years before this most recent decennial census, I became involved in an effort to make one of our publicly available data sets called the Planning Database more accessible to internal and external stakeholders. While my presentation focuses on a predictive measure that drove census decision-making, I do hope that I can convey the power we put in users' hands by developing this kind of mapping tool for locating and learning about areas in a more general sense too. The purpose of the planning database is to help us, number one, identify and locate hard-to-count census tracts using a measure called the low response score, which I'll get into a little bit more detail about on the next slide. And number two, to learn more about these areas from a demographic and socioeconomic perspective using American Community Survey estimates. Hard to count areas are hard to count for different reasons, and the approach we'd take in census tracts with limited internet connectivity would be different than census tracts where many of the residents speak a language other than English, for instance. Before we jump into a live demo of the web mapping application that we call the Response Outreach Area Mapper, or ROAM, I want to spend a little more time laying out the low response score to help set the scene. In short, the low response score is a predictive metric of self-response that the Census Bureau modeled in-house. In longer statistician speak, it's calculated using an ordinary least squares regression model, where the 2010 census response rate was used as the dependent variable against a select group of other characteristics available in the planning database. The low response score should be interpreted as the percentage of households predicted to not self-respond to the 2020 census. So the higher the value, the harder that area is to count. There are several instances where a low response score is not calculated for a given census tract. The one that I would like to highlight here, and we'll see once we get into ROAM's map, is that a census tract needed to have a certain number of qualifying addresses in the mail-out, mail-back areas for the 2010 census in order to have that low response score calculated. Unfortunately, that includes a significant number of tribal areas who were mostly enumerated in a different type of operation called Update Enumerate last decade. Also last decade, the planning database was only available as a comma delimited data set to download, and that had to be brought into a third-party application to make use of it, which required some other set of technical skills. And it required many different groups to do this time and time again for various purposes. So our planning and field staff used ROAM to help inform recruiting and hiring efforts in hard-to-count areas. Internal staff also used this tool to direct informed outreach to hard-to-count populations. This tool was also demoed for tribal, state, and local leaders to leave these valuable maps and data in their hands as well. ROAM became a decision-making tool for many external stakeholders and advocates who were working to boost self-response rates. An increase in self-response is a decrease in total cost to the census overall. So upon entering ROAM, we're looking at a national map of census tracts that are shaded by their low response score. Remember that low response score, or the percentage of households predicted to not self-respond to the decennial census, are seen here on the map. As we see in this legend, the higher the low response score, the darker the census tract, meaning that the harder it is to count. So the darker areas are the harder to count areas here. And this darkest blue shows that between 30 to 48.4% of households in these darkest census tracts are likely to not self-respond to the 2020 census. I can navigate around this map similar to how you would navigate other familiar web mapping applications with zoom tools and panning around. But if we zoom into this large gray area on the map, we can see that the low response score is not calculated in this area. If we click in the map here in Apache County, Arizona, we can still look at the select group of characteristics from the planning database to see the various measures that we've included in this tool. We can see measures of population, income, age, poverty, educational attainment, health insurance, race and ethnicity, languages spoken, housing including homeowner versus renter occupied, family measures, mobility measures, and various internet data points. Now, I'm familiar with this area, so I know that this is part of Navajo Nation, but we have additional data layers that a user can turn on to determine the types of relationships to other geographies. So if we turn on our American Indian area layer, we can click back onto the map and see that this is indeed Navajo Nation Reservation. So all of these ways of navigating the map are helpful if you're simply exploring, but we can choose to go to a particular type of geographic area. So if we decide to go to Cameron County, Texas, which is on the border with Mexico, we can see that there are concentrations of hardest to count areas here. In this particular area, we may expect there to be more language barriers here, but we can open up the pop-up again to confirm and see what other characteristics may make up this area. If we visit another familiar place, and change our base map to satellite imagery. We can explore another data set that Rome makes available. What we're looking at here is our 2020 census audience segmentation data. Each census tract in the country is categorized into one of 8 segments that are grouped together by similar self-response behavior and demographics, as well as their mindsets towards surveys and their patterns of media consumption. We've made a summary profile for each of these audience segmentation categories available right from within Rome. We can take a look at the additional information that we provide. Here are some of our demographics and mindsets for this particular audience segment, as well as information about their media consumption. We can even look at that classification across the main map at the national level. So for more curious users, you're able to ask questions of the underlying data set as well by using the underlying data table. So I'm going to go ahead and turn back on our low response score and expose the underlying data table. Any of the data that we've seen in the pop-up that we've been exploring within the map is also available right within this data table. So we can look for census tracts that are in Baltimore City. So we'll go to Baltimore City, Maryland. And let's say that we'd like to find census tracts that have a low response score is at least 30. So we'll identify some of the hardest to count census tracts in Baltimore City, Maryland by using this query. If we look down at the bottom left, there are 53 features within this data table now. So 53 census tracts have a low response score higher than 30 in Baltimore City. And now we can interact with this data table as if we were in a simple Microsoft Excel application, for instance. So we can sort these and zoom to them on the map. So right now we're looking at the 3 hardest to count census tracts in Baltimore City, Maryland. Taking our analysis a step further, we can search for additional open source data layers to drop into our map. So now, for instance, if I'm a partnership specialist looking to spread the census word in the community here, within the hardest to count areas, I would likely select this library to host an educational workshop. So in addition to us being able to use, in addition to us being able to add additional data sets into our map, we've made our authoritative web mapping services, so basically everything that you just saw in Rome's map, available to other web developers so that they can use our authoritative data as map layers in their own applications. And with that, I urge you to go to census.gov/Rome to learn more about the tool and to explore it on your own. Thank you for joining us today.